and go from there. So this is Ohio take 2. Since we've done this. So there were probably, how many people were on the other call, you guys? Maybe 9 or 10 of them who already got Ohio information, and we're going to do it again. So let me just go ahead and hit share on the screen and we'll dive right in. I'm actually happy at the folks that I see, because I know Stephanie, I've talked to her several times. Andre has been on here a couple of times, but I would love to get into even more talking about strategy, Natalie, because you're an organizer, about how to use the data and what to do with it. Because to me, that's the part. The data is great because we want to use it for, getting funding and strategy and all of that. And none of that matters if you don't have the right messaging to get people engaged in voting, right? So that's what we want to focus on. So for the purposes of the recording, I'm going to go over all the other stuff again, but I'll do it relatively quickly. So we did this 100 rural power building counties strategy, and this is like an overview. The link is on the website. I'm going to email it to you as well, so that you can just look at like what counties were selected for power building. And the focus of that specific project was which counties can we make a power play with. But there were other counties that didn't make the power list, but they absolutely matter for the next election and should be focused on. It's a part of a short-term piece of a very long-term strategy. Okay. So this is Ohio, the Ohio presentation. And to do this, I gathered data from the 2020 presidential and House elections, your gubernatorial elections, your Senate and House and 2022 elections, your voter registration, voter turnout results, and then the population of your counties and your percent rural. The reason those things matter is because we're looking at where do we put resources. So if the population of a county was 2,000 and there was another county that's 8,000, we're not going to put 2,000, on the power list, because it just doesn't make sense to put resources there. So what we did is we looked at the states across the country where the margins were 10% or less, especially the states that were battleground states or swing states. And then once those were identified, we looked within those states for the rural counties where the margins were 10% or less. We used the 2010 census data to look at rural percentages so that we would know how many rural people are in those proposed counties. And then once I had those list of counties for each of those elections, cross-reference them to see which ones kept showing up, right? Which ones were my frequent counties across the board in each of those elections. And so once they were identified, then it was about finding their population numbers, the percentage of rural, and then any common districts or seats that we could flip, that we could extend leads on, that we could make some moves with. So this was a completely data-driven process. It is not about, oh, I'd like to see someone go, so let me look at the data in that county, right? Like as much as I would love to see MTG go. Her numbers do not support that. So she didn't make my Georgia list, right? But in Colorado, Bobart did, not because I wanted to focus on her, but because there were 10 counties selected in Colorado, and out of those 10, 7 were in her district, right? So we knew that the race was close last time, but we didn't know how many of those were rural counties and how quickly could they be impacted. So the data led us to that, which is great information to have, especially when you're looking for funding and initiatives and things like that. So when you look at the engagement, and there were 6 counties that were identified for Ohio. It's Erie, Lorain, Mahoning, Portage, Athens, and Wood. And that's which ones made the power building list. And they made it for a couple of reasons. So in Ohio and those 6 counties, 163,537 registered voters did not cast a ballot in the 2020 presidential election. And an additional 100,000 didn't vote in the 2022 Senate race. So just by mobilizing those voters that are already registered to vote that did not cast a ballot in those 2 elections, we would mobilize about 53% of the vote difference for the presidential election and more than 100% of the votes needed to flip your Senate seat. So imagine being able to go to funders, imagine being able to go to your state party and say, listen, these 6 rural counties, that typically get neglected, right? Or the rural areas of these counties have enough registered voters who aren't currently engaged in the process to flip your Senate seat and cover half of what's needed for the presidential election, right? And then at the same time, the secondary benefit is you make serious gains in districts 9 and districts 13 in your House, right? So the data really demonstrates that by ensuring that 182,915 rural voters of these counties are registered, empowered, and I would say inspired prior to 2024, so that we can have measurable wins, right, in this state, because Ohio is crucial. This presentation is the pretty version, and this is what you're going to get. You're going to get your presidential data, your House data, your gubernatorial data. I'm going through this quickly because I'm going to show you the detailed data on my spreadsheet. But this is what you're going to get: your Senate data and then your 2022 House data. So now I want to show it to you from my version and what that looked like when I put it together, so that you can see how I got to where I got. So let me hit share on that. And if you have questions, comments along the way, feel free to raise your hand, throw it in the chat box, come off mute, any of that good stuff, okay? So what I did in looking at these counties was to identify the ones that had margins of 10% or less, and where they have the additional light blue and light red, it means that those margins were 5% or less. And so, and I did that across all the elections that we talked about. And then we looked at the number of people that were registered to vote and what percentage of those voters were actually turning out to vote. So in this area that's right here, this is your voting data, okay? So I want you to look and see that 66 to 73% of your people are registered to vote in all of these counties. So what does that tell you? It tells you that a voter registration drive isn't necessarily where you want to put the majority of your resources. But when you look at voter turnout, that's a big issue, because you literally have 55% or less of your population voting in a presidential election. And it gets even lower when you get to your gubernatorial and your Senate races. So can you imagine what that looks like when only a third of the people are voting, right? I've shared this before and I'll share it again. Like, people think that Tennessee is super duper red, and we are and we aren't. But the reason we have a supermajority here is because about 38% of the state actually votes. So that's a problem, right? When people aren't turning out to vote. The great thing about this is, when I'm watching my Pepsi so it doesn't overflow, y'all, sorry. I've been talking for hours now. But the great thing about looking at this data is that when you have this conversation with people, they cared enough. At one point in time, the last group of Ohio people told me that you guys are not an automatic voter registration state. So that tells me that these folks who are registered to vote took the time at some point to register on their own. They were interested in the process of voting. They were interested in voting for their candidates, but for some reason, they're not engaged, right? So if I look at Wood County, 70%, almost 71% are registered to vote. Half of your population voted in the presidential election, 20% of them stayed home, and about 37% voted in the gubernatorial and Senate election. So half of the people registered actually turned out to vote in 2022. That's crazy, right? So what's the first question? If you were going to talk to these people, Natalie, you're an organizer. Andrea, you don't get to cheat because you heard me say this somewhere else, but what's the first question you ask somebody like this that is a registered voter and yet they are not participating in the process? What do you say to them? What's one of the first things you can say?
I would probably ask why, or I'd probably approach it more of like what they care about and then try to frame it with a voting ask. But yeah, big why. This is an issue we run into all the time.
So how would you ask why? Would you actually
Uh,
say why didn't you vote? How would you say it?
why do you feel like maybe the candidates or what issues on the ballot aren't, going to affect you or
Yeah.
something?
So that's what we hear a lot. And a lot of times that's what our scripts and vans say and all that good stuff, right? Let me ask you something. What is your first reaction when someone you don't know asks you why you did or didn't do something?
You
You
get
get
defensive.
defensive of your choice. You get defensive, right? Especially in rural counties, because what do rural people hear from progressives all the time? You vote against your own interest. You da 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 da, right? So they're already defensive from the start. So I'll share with you a technique that I love to use, and I'll say, "Well, can you share with me? Can you share with me? You know, what made you get registered to vote in the first in the first, good gosh, what made you get registered to vote in the beginning? Why'd you register at all? Can you share it with me?" Share makes it seem like we are in this together, because the reality is that we are, right? So by asking someone to share their experiences, their hindrances, their challenges with me, I'm showing them that I actually care about them as a person and not just their vote. I'm not going to ask them why they didn't vote. I'm going to say, can you share with me why you were interested in registering to vote and, at one point in time? And what happened? What happened? Where did the country fail you? Where did the state fail you? Because you're here, you wanted to exercise your vote at some point in time, and now you're not. I don't know. Some people don't vote, and I'll say this sometimes abstractly because it gives people an out. I'll say, some people are just like fatigued. They have what I call politic fatigue. Other people, couldn't find daycare, couldn't take the day off from work, didn't have public transportation, different stuff like that. If you could just vote, if you had the day off from work, would you? Those types of things. Can you share with me, if that makes sense? I don't want to pour this on me. Okay. So if I were in Ohio, one of my biggest focuses would be on finding out why people aren't turning out to vote. And there are lessons from what has happened in August and what's happening now along the process. I think it's important for us to not assume that the huge turnout that happened in August means that all of those people are progressives and that we can ride that wave into next year, automatically assuming that it's going to be a progressive vote, because it may not be. A lot of those people that were conservatives said, I don't like them trying to raise, the percentage that it takes for us to change the Constitution. They didn't like someone infringing upon their rights. They didn't like that feeling of big government or the way that the supermajority was going about things. That doesn't mean it's going to translate into a Democratic vote or a progressive vote for next year. So how do we ensure that it does? We have to start to take conversations and look at, well, how are these other people voting? How are their constituents, not their constituents, how are their representatives voting on these issues? In a state race, I would 100% be hounding the people who wanted to raise it. All of the people who voted to raise the percentage to change the Constitution, I'd be hammering them next year. I would be hammering them all day long, right? Because they don't like big government. But it's an emotional thing. So how do you tie into the emotions? If you are in or near any of these counties, what do you think the issues are that are impacting those counties the most? Anybody have any ideas or suggestions? So you've
I
heard, go ahead, Natalie.
Oh, I'm sorry, I live in Athens County, so I can tell you like the economy is definitely and housing are two big things for us.
100%. So I'll share with you. So I talk about the 4 pillars all the time. I believe that every issue comes back to one of 4 things: healthcare, housing, education, and economic security. It's always going to be one of those 4 things, right? So when we talk about housing, the way that I approached having housing conversations last year is I found out we had talking points. So I said, I don't know about you, but I know people that have had problems paying their rent, who have trouble making rent. Rent has gotten really high, right? And so I said, so did you know that there's $400 million in rental assistance money that's sitting in the bank right now? And 60% of the people that apply get turned down by Governor Kemp's office. People were like, what? I actually had a girl one time say, I'm one of those 60%. I got declined, right? So it's about saying the money is there for you and the people in power aren't giving it to you. They're not making it available to you. Do you know how much Ohio's surplus is right now? Do you know what kind of, because Republicans like to talk about being fiscally conservative and fiscally responsible. Do you all have like what our governor Bill Lee calls it his rainy day fund? It's a few $1 billion. Do you all have one of those in Ohio? Do you know? See, so that's something that you want to know, because this is the way that I have framed that information. I have framed that information by being able to say, okay, so listen, if DCS, I don't know if you guys call it DCS where you all, but that's the Department of Children's Services. What I will say to people is, listen, if DCS came to your house and you had $20,000, $25,000 just sitting in your bank, but your kids didn't have food in the cupboard, they hadn't gone to the pediatrician, they hadn't gotten their vaccinations and their shots and stuff like that for school, would DCS call you fiscally responsible, or would they take your kids? They would take your kids, right? But that's what our elected officials are doing. They are hoarding money while our children lose access to health care, while our public education systems aren't being funded, while they have high rates of food insecurity, but we have the money. That's an emotional talking point based on numbers and data. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's how do you have these conversations in a way that moves people off of their couch, out their front door, and to cast a ballot? So when I keep going into the data, a column that I want you to pay a lot of attention to is this column for other votes. The reason that column is important to you is because these are people that are already engaged in the process. These are people that are registered and they are actually casting a ballot. Now, I want to put that in perspective for you as to how important this is. So think about these numbers of people right here. In 2020, we all knew what was at stake in the presidential election. In Mahoning County, right, the difference in these votes was about what, 2,300, less than 2,300 votes. 2,424 people voted other. That's almost the difference in the vote. But those people could not bring themselves to vote for Joe Biden or for Trump. They voted other, knowing good and well what it would mean. Can you imagine? I mean, I'll be really frank. Joe Biden was not my first choice, but I surely was not going to write in some other name or vote for, anybody else, because the idea is that if I didn't vote for Joe Biden, it was going to count. The impact would be a vote for Trump, right? But these folks couldn't bring themselves to do that. So where did we miss them? Because we miss them. Like it or not, we miss them. And we can't afford to miss them in 2024. We simply can't. I look at like this race right here in Lorain. That is a 3,900 vote difference. 3,545 people voted other. If we gained those people that voted other, all we would need was 300 votes to flip that county. If you simply got the people who already cast a ballot to vote Democrat, in 2024. All you'd need to get is another 308 people. Now go back up here to Mahoning and look at your numbers. So if I look at Mahoning right here, 72, almost 73% of the population is registered to vote. Only 52% voted in the last presidential election. So do you think we could find 308 votes? Yeah, 100%. Because they are most likely already registered to vote. They're just not voting. So that's the power of the numbers. That's the power of being able to go to your local county or your different philanthropic organizations and say, listen, there was a deficit of 3,900 in Mahoning, right? There were 3,500 people that voted other, and we can flip this county blue if we simply invest the time, the money, and the energy into reaching those people and having a conversation about why they couldn't bring themselves to vote one way or the other in 2020. And what do they need? Sometimes we're scared to ask that question. What would it take for you to vote for the Democratic candidate in 2024? We should ask that question. 100%. Because the reason why you can ask that question is because it gives you the roadmap to a yes. So the way that I follow that up is I'll say, okay, so what are the issues that are important to you? And let's just say they say, keeping our hospitals from closing, funding public education, and bringing more jobs to the region. And so my follow-up to that would be, so what you're telling me, I want to make sure I understand, is that if I can show you a candidate that has a plan that is spelled out on how to fund public education, bring jobs in the community to provide economic security, right? And a plan for healthcare and to mitigate rural hospital closures, you would vote for them come 2024. Is that what I hear you saying? And if they say yes, that's all I'm focused on. Because at the end of that, they can't bring up anything else. And I will ask, are you sure there's nothing else? Right? Because once they say that, then if I ask for their vote and they tell me no, I have the right to come back and say, wait a second. When we started this conversation, you told me that if I could show you these three things, we could count on you to vote. I showed them to you. So did you lie to me then, or are you lying to me now? Right? And sometimes you can be that bold because you've gotten permission. You did everything they asked you for. So one of the best ways to overcome objections is to get them out of the way first. Okay. So have you ever heard of a baby negative? Has anybody heard of a baby? If you've been around me, you may have heard me talk about one before. But a baby negative is addressing the elephant in the room. So one of the things that I would tackle in every before anybody could say anything to me about Joe Biden, you know what I would say? Listen, I know Joe's old. I know Joe is old. I would come out the gates with it, because you are not going to hit me with that later. You're not. Yep, you're right. He is old. And I do wish that we had a candidate that was younger. And at the same time, I don't want to discriminate just based on someone's age. So if we take his age and we set it aside, because we can't make him younger and we can't make Trump younger, we can't make anybody else any other age, because if we could, we would all be younger than we are. Right? But since nobody's discovered the fountain of youth, can we talk about the things that have done and how they've impacted you so far? I would immediately just take it off the thing, because the other guy's like, what, 4 years younger, fatter, slower, and can't lift a glass. I'll take the guy who's 82 and rides a bike versus the guy who, walks down a ramp like he's wearing 8-inch heels. I don't know if you've ever walked down a hill wearing heels, but it is very precarious. And if you notice the way that I say things, I inject humor into conversations. You want to know why? It is very hard to say no when you're smiling, right? When you laugh, it takes down your defenses. So the reason I talk about all of these things while I'm talking about the data is because the data is useless unless you can get someone to talk to you, unless you can get someone to listen, unless you can get some funding. It's useless. So it's a combination of these two things. A lot of times in the progressive part of the world, we hound on having really good policies that we think just make sense. But I don't know about y'all, like I'm divorced. Obviously, I don't always do things that make sense because I married him, right? What we know is that our emotions don't always make sense. So we have to make people emotional about voting. So how do we have those types of conversations with people in a way that motivates them? You will see that each of these counties that are on here, they show up very similar, except they've started to trend in some areas really, really red. So you want to take a look at where can we stop that bleed and what's causing it? What's causing it? If I look at the Senate votes for Wood, they were Republican, but barely, right? That was a pretty close race, right? If I add these two together, though, not so much. I get to 28,000 compared to 19,000. I have a 9,000 vote difference for Wood County in the House, right? But if I look at the Senate race, it's a lot closer. So the fact that there's two different districts actually benefits me because I can tell that Wood in District 9 is more Democratic and more progressive than the part of Wood that is District 5. See that? So that's going to help me in terms of focusing my strategy. Who am I going to talk to and why? Because I will take a, 3,000 vote deficit over a 5,000 vote deficit all day, right? Because it just makes sense to do so. The other thing that I want you to look at are your voters. So you guys are actually in a good position despite the purging of voter registration rolls. You're ending up still above. The place that's gotten hit the hardest is Athens, and you and I both know why, right? So Athens is a place where you do need to engage in voter registration because you are losing it. If I look between 2020 and 2022, 1,200 people are not on the rolls. That's 3%, right? Everywhere else has made gains. So we got to start to focus on those types of things in those areas. So Athens, voter registration, voter turnout. All the other counties, voter turnout, heavy, 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 right? And then it's figuring out how to tie it in. So I give this example, and I gave it in the last session for Ohio folks. You want to think about organizing like dating. When you start to have a conversation with people, it is, I don't know if you've ever online dated. I'm not here to judge you. Don't share with me, but I'm just saying you have about 30 to 60 seconds to get someone to swipe right. Right? So what are you going to say in that first 30 to 60 seconds that makes someone want to talk to you? I can promise you this, it's not going to be a policy tidbit. It's not. You can't say anything about Trump or Biden or anything in 60 seconds that's going to make somebody want to stop and talk to you. That will hardly ever be the case. So usually the first thing I say is, I know you do not want to stand here and talk to me on this Saturday afternoon about politics. I get it, because trust me, I don't want to be here either. But I don't have a choice. I don't have a choice. And I will literally say to people, you would think that it wouldn't matter because I was in Georgia, but I would say to people, listen, I was in Tennessee and I know what it is to have your healthcare system become a medical monopoly. I know what it is to see babies and people die because they do not have access to healthcare. And I do not want to see that happen in Georgia. Georgia has lost 6 rural hospitals in the last 4 years, and it has 10 more that are at risk of closure. So what have I done there? I have acknowledged the elephant in the room that you don't want to be talking to me. I have showed you that it is important because I don't want to be talking to you either, but I feel like I must. And I've said to you, the reason why is because I care about you and I don't want to see bad thing happens that I've already experienced. So now we have a personal connection. So in just that quick 30-second spiel, I've gotten out over your objection already. I've established the importance of our conversation. I've given a personal story and established connection. Swipe right. Right? Swipe right. Okay, girl. And I promise I'm not going to take up too much of your time. Can I get you to give me 3 minutes? Because I just used 1. Can I get you to give me 3 more minutes? Awesome. Can you share with me how you feel about politics right now? How do you feel about voting? I'm not pitching anything. I am listening and I am learning. Right? I hate it. I'm so sick of mainstream media. I don't want to hear about another, even though I want the indictment, I don't want to hear about another indictment. I don't want to hear about Bidenomics. I don't want to hear about Dark Brandon. I don't want to hear nothing. I'm over it. I'm sick of it. It sucks. My immediate response is, girl, I feel you. Guess what though? None of that is going to go away. Like it or not, the media makes money off of this stuff. So the media isn't feeding your kids, right? They're not determining what you're going to pay in rent, how much, money you're going to have for Medicaid expansion or not Medicaid expansion, right? So I get the fact that all that stuff is irritating. I'm right there with you. And I'm a service connected disabled veteran. And there are a lot of things that I do not like about the way things are being done in this country. And I still hope that we get it together so we can do better. So if you were going to pick the top 2 things or 3 things that would make you come out your house next year and vote, what would they be? What would it be? And let them tell you. Because now out of the 5 or 10 policies that you know about from your candidate, you can tailor that policy to that person. And then be honest. You know what? You talked about daycare. I don't have an answer for that. But if you'll give me your information, I'll get it for you. Right? So all of those things are how you use this data to be really effective in talking to people and having conversations. Use the data to develop strategy, figure out where you're going to put your resources and how you're going to get funding. That's what the data is for. Strategy, funding, and resources. And then once you develop those things, then you can have the conversations in a way that touches, inspires, and touches, moves, and inspires people to get out and vote. That's what's required. So I'm going to pause right there for comments, questions. I am game for anything because this is my second Ohio presentation and I didn't record the first one. So you guys get like the extra version of anything else that you want to talk about in terms of messaging, strategy, the data, any of that stuff. Yeah.
Um, I live in a congressional district that is not going to appear on your power building
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Yeah,
thing. But I just wonder what, like, how to use this this type of information. Uh, how to use this type of information in my county and my district.
I gotcha. So what county are you in?
I'm in Essex County
Okay.
in New York.
Okay. Essex. Hold on. Let me do this. Good Lord. Election. Dun. No, Google, you cannot know my location. You're nosy. All right. So I'm gonna pull you up real quick. And I actually did New York too. Where's my New York stuff?
I guess I'm Go
Let
ahead.
me show you, babe. Hold on though. I knew Essex. Hold on. Because I did New York and I know that this is okay, Andrea. Good to see you again. I know that this is Ohio, but you're on here and you asked. So I'm going to show you. So this is the New York data. And Essex was Democratic in the 2020 presidential election, right? But then if you look everywhere else, it's Republican, but it's still 10% or less. And your Senate was super duper close. So when I look, let me see if you did make my power building. How funny would that be? Um, the final version. The final version of New York. I have 17 states, so I can't remember all the ones that made the cut at the end. Well, do you want to scroll for me, Google? Maybe. Yes, but now you scrolled way too much. Sorry. Holy jeez. I'm going to do this. Control find New York. Oh, there it is. Okay. So you did, my love. Essex is on here.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness. See, this is what I
Cool.
love about the
Cool.
data. Essex is here, right? And so you were surprised. You were like, oh, it's not going to be there, but it is there. It is 100% there. So the reason why, and now I'm going to go to the New York tab itself. This is my full spreadsheet. So as soon as it finishes getting there. There we go. Okay. So the reason Essex made it is because whenever you see this little light red, it was close, right? And the reason, so look at this. In your presidential election, you were solidly Republican, right? By 2,900 votes, but 7,100 people voted other. See, Andrea's mouth was like, what? The what? That's the majority of your voting difference right there.
Yeah.
So the exact conversation that I was just having about Ohio and those other numbers is relevant to Essex. And the same thing down here. Look, I actually have you identified down here in your 2020 House votes. This was 9,000 Republican votes and 8,600. So there was a 400 vote difference. And 1,900 people voted other. That's enough to flip your seat. I've got you down here too. You would have been up if these people that voted other in your gubernatorial election had simply voted Democratic, you all would have flipped your county in your governor's race in 2022 by an extra 32 votes. And I even have you notice, look, I have you marked right here, can flip for your Senate seat. These are my little personal notes. See?
Great.
This is what I love, because sometimes we think, oh, there's no way this is ever going to happen here, because we live here and we're in it all the time. And then all of a sudden, we're there, right? Because the data shows otherwise.
Yeah, okay. I think I was thinking too heavily about Elise Stefanik in the congressional district, but broken down by county. Yeah, this is
Yeah.
great. Great.
And so look at your congressional district. So in 2022, you're in District 21. So if I look at Clinton, Essex, is this Otsego? Otsego? How do you say that?
Otsego.
Otsego, right? And then Warren. If those are four, this is what I loved about New York's data, is districts 19 and District 21 each had 4 rural counties. You can make serious gains or flip that seat. And this is the thing about the numbers. They don't lie. So how do we have conversations around that? I wonder how many people, if you told in your county that Essex was that close and that it made a rural power building list, I wonder how many people would come out and vote that thought there was no need for them last time, right? People who thought, what's the use? All of a sudden you have information that says just a little bit more, y'all, and we could do this.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So I'll put together a presentation, because I'm not sure when I'm going to do a New York deep dive, but I'll put it together in the spreadsheet, Stephanie, and email you. Let me give you, I'm going to put my email down here. They're still putting together, I'm so new to the organization, they're still putting together my rural vote email. So this is my like direct private email, but shoot me an email if you just like bump it and don't let me forget, and I will put together the New York numbers and send them to you.
Great.
100%.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Okay.
See, now you're all excited. This is what, it was so funny when I was working on this project. My mom was like, you have been at this like for 10 hours. And I was like, yeah, but Mom, did you know that there are 5 counties in South Carolina that are this close? And she was like, South Carolina? I was like, yes. Oh my God. And because it's just stuff that we don't think about. I found a county, there's one of my counties, and I can't remember which one now, that the vote difference was 1 vote. 1 flipping vote. So it's like so empowering when you see that it's not as gloom and doom as we think. And don't believe what we see on MSNBC or CNN all damn day long, because it is the fringe. The problem is that the majority of the GOP base is voting along with the fringe because they think the fringe has the power. But when we demonstrate they don't have the power we do, then all of a sudden we become relevant. Right? When we can actually demonstrate to our state and our national organizations and our parties that rural counties have the power, right? We will get the funding. And when we get it, we have to know how to use it. Have to know how to use it. And so it's funny, Afton was talking to me, I think yesterday or the day before, because prior to me, I'm going to stop recording, but prior to me,